Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Hello, I'm Kerry L. Watt and welcome to the show. Now, I was reading recently in the Guardian newspaper that Polish remains the most common non-British nationality in the UK. And the Office of National Statistics says that there are over 1 million Polish people residing in the UK. And the Guardian also said that it's never been easier to get our hands on Poland's best produce. And just a simple Google search for recipes shows thousands and thousands of things appearing. And it certainly shows that it's clear we are embracing the cuisine as well. Now, my guest today has some fascinating insight into Polish food and culture. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. Please welcome Ren Behan to the show. Welcome, Ren.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my goodness, that was such a chipper and happy hello. Now, you are actually an expert in Polish food. So I wondered if you can tell us what makes the cuisine and all of that special to you.
Yeah, so expert's a big word, isn't it? I'm actually a second generation Pole. So I was born here in the UK to Polish parents who had kind of emigrated or ended up in the UK sort of post Second World War. So we sort of call that, the sort of post Second World War generation of Poles. And obviously since then there have been different waves of migration, particularly sort of in 2004 when Poland sort of entered the EU and things kind of expanded a little bit in that way. So, but for me, I've always had a very sort of strong affiliation with Poland, with Polish food. It's part of my culture. It's part of my heritage. We were very much sort of brought up to respect that. We spoke Polish at home. My mum cooked Polish food. And so it feels like it's something that's very much been with me throughout my life, and it's part of my journey. And it's really, really lovely to see this sort of renewed interest in Polish food, and just to see, exactly how much there is out there, recipe-wise and food-wise and ingredients-wise. And I have to say, some of it's still a little bit unknown to us. So it's a really nice thing to be able to introduce people to Polish food in a very positive and modern way.
Yeah, I love that. And I have to ask, is Polish food like the stuff that we see in the foreign food aisles in the supermarkets, or is it actually completely different and more the home-cooked traditional stuff? What's the difference?
Do you know, I was only in the food aisle the other day looking at the dire selection of stuff on offer, and it's a real bugbear of mine because it actually isn't representative at all of Polish food. And I think what, obviously supermarkets try and do is kind of put a few products out there that they think people might sort of pick up. But it is a shame because Polish food is really very, very much kind of a seasonal thing. There's a lot of freshness there. We make a lot of our food from scratch. So, it's not the kind of tinned or canned stuff that you sort of tend to see on the shelves. But I guess that's stuff that's got the longest shelf life. So that's why it kind of goes out there. But if you go into a more traditional Polish shop, kind of, your classic sort of Polski sklep, there'll be lots more in there and things that include kind of lots of smoked meats. So things like hams and cabanos and that kind of stuff, which is our version of really like a Parma ham and chorizo sort of thing. Mm. So every kind of country's got their own sort of flavour profile. And I suppose ours is a little bit more smoky, lots of kind of flavours like caraway seeds and so you'll see a lot more of that. And then obviously fresh bread, the desserts are to die for. So if you ever have an opportunity to pick up a Polish donut, which is called a pączek, you'd find one with rose petal jam, with lovely prune jam, topped with icing. So that, there's lots of Polish food that can be explored anywhere really. But I think you have to venture out of the bog standard supermarket aisle to get a really good idea for what Polish food is about. Or even, going to a Polish restaurant. There's so many of them now in the UK. And elsewhere, that I think you can get a better sense of that if you're not going to kind of do the trip and go to Poland, which I'd encourage as well. But It's generally, we eat lots of kind of fermented foods. So the sauerkraut, which obviously is really, really common at the moment. And it's become this big buzz thing, for us all to eat raw, organic sauerkraut. And we've been eating, the Poles have been eating that for centuries. It's the same with kefir. That's, something that my grandmother would drink, and I'd kind of look at it and go, oh, but, now because we can get, organic kefir, it's suddenly a thing. So I think lots of the foods that we're experiencing at the moment have certainly got, Eastern European roots. And for us, it's not a new thing, whereas here, things happen in sort of waves and trends. And so those two things alone, sauerkraut and kefir, are very, very, very much found in the Polish kitchen.
Mm. And is it just us in the UK that are embracing this new type of, well, it might not be new, it's certainly new to me. But yeah, is it just people in the UK that are embracing the Polish food, or is it sort of, a worldwide thing?
I think there are pockets of Poles all over the world, because the Polish diaspora, particularly post Second World War, found itself everywhere, from America to Canada to India, all over Africa. There were sorts of Polish camps and Polish children. So there are sort of pockets of Poles all over the world. There's a big Polish kind of population as well in Australia. So I don't think it is unique to the UK. I think that we feel that there are a lot of Poles here and that we're maybe embracing more Polish food. But actually, if you look at the spread of Poles globally, we are pretty much well covered all over the world. And certainly in places like America, for instance, there are pretty much as many Poles in Chicago as there are in Warsaw. And that gives you an idea of, how many Poles there are just in certain pockets of the States. And obviously, you have lots of more food festivals. They'll have Polish food festivals. They sort of really embrace things like pierogi, which are Polish dumplings. You'll get those everywhere in America. And so we're actually in the UK a little bit slower to catch up, I'd say, but it is happening. It's definitely visible. And certainly in other parts of the world, you'll see pockets of Poles doing their thing. And, and it's just quite interesting, really.
Absolutely. I think that's fascinating. I had absolutely no idea. And I think it's really interesting, actually, when you say about the history of it, certainly after world wars and things, I just would never have thought that, really. So it's fascinating. Thank you. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about your own background, and kind of what led you to what you're doing right now.
Yeah, so I I studied at University College London and the School of Slavonic and Eastern European Studies. That's a mouthful. So I was already kind of quite interested in things like Eastern European history and politics and economics and stuff like Soviet foreign policy. That was kind of all part of my undergraduate degree. But I then went on to become a qualified solicitor. So I trained as a lawyer. And I became a criminal lawyer here in the UK. And I did that for a few years. And then my family sort of grew and expanded. I had a couple of little children. I've now got 3. And I sort of took a step back from the law and had an extended maternity leave / sort of career break. And then I just thought, I'm quite interested in food. I love cooking. I'm always in the kitchen, seemingly always kind of cooking for friends and family. And I just sort of started to explore, the avenues of what could I do from home that would kind of be quite interesting, I suppose. So I started looking at food writing, and I was quite interested in, had a huge collection of cookery books, always reading blogs and sort of, kind of looking at what was going on in the world of food. And I just thought, why not try it? So I found an online diploma in food journalism, which was a kind of self-paced work from home thing. I did that, and the very first bit of my homework was to start a food blog, because they said, that's where you're going to kind of get yourself out there, practice writing, develop your voice. It could all be done through having a food blog. So I literally hit publish on a food blog. And that kind of took me on this whirlwind adventure of food writing, not only on my own food blog, but I wrote then for other platforms. So I spent a couple of years writing kind of columns and things for jamieoliver.com. I would submit recipes and have them published on kind of the Good Food channel and in magazines. Delicious published a few, and BBC Good Food, and it really just kind of was the beginning of the adventure, really. And I'd say at that point I was quite interested in lots of different foods. You know, I was a mother, I was cooking for my children, and yet something about my Polish heritage was kind of always there. I'd always be ringing my mum for recipes. I'd always be trying to recreate the flavours of my childhood, I suppose, for my own children. So that's really how I got into sort of food writing, and then specialising in Polish food, I guess.
Wow, that is just fascinating. What a story. I love that. I find people's backstories fascinating. I love it when people sort of study to do something, and then, you know, something happens, or like you said, you know, kids come along and you're just like, actually, I quite fancy something else. I think that's incredible. And I wondered if you could tell us about the book, and it's Wild Honey and Rye, right?
Yeah, Wild Honey and Rye, Modern Polish Recipes. So I always kind of had said to myself that if I was ever going to write a cookery book, if I was ever, you know, lucky enough to get that opportunity, then I'd want it to be about Polish food, because, you know, there are lots of, you know, directions I suppose I could have gone in, but for me, I think I just wanted to really explore my heritage and, you know, where it all began for me, and so I tried my hardest to kind of convince people that Polish food would be a good thing to write about. It wasn't easy, you know, obviously nothing is ever straightforward, and it took a little while to build my own profile, to really kind of, you know, spread that message and, you know, convince people that there was something there, you know, worth exploring and worth putting into a book. Because I think often you could say, oh yeah, but, you know, I've got all these family recipes, but, you know, what's the angle that's going to make it interesting to anybody else, you know? And so I took a couple of trips to Poland. I'd always gone to Poland for holidays and things, and we've got still lots of family over there. But I think it was in 2015 when I just went over with some friends, and I was just really stunned at how much kind of Polish food had moved on. It was just shortly after, I think, the restaurant in Warsaw had received its first sort of Michelin star, so you could really feel those standards were much higher. People were really aspiring to something bigger, and I was just overwhelmed at how much choice there was, at how much modern interpretation there was of Polish food, kind of really sort of chefs going back to their roots, but really making the most of sort of the food of their land, and, you know, interpreting it in different ways. And that's what, when I sort of came back here and, you know, spoke to my sort of agent and a couple of publishers, and that's the angle that I wanted to look at, this sort of modern, you know, where Polish food is going now, rather than being too nostalgic and kind of it being where it used to be, because I did feel it had moved on. But as with anything, I think there's always a fine balance between, you know, reimagining and reinterpreting, and then holding true to what Polish food is really all about. So I was very keen to make sure that the traditional elements of Polish food were very much visible through my book and very much respected and honoured. But for instance, it turned out that it was then shot in a modern way. You know, we had some lovely styling going on, worked with a fantastic Japanese photographer called Yuki Sugiura, and again, she brought something amazing kind of to the picture. And so, yes, it started to sort of take on this slightly modern angle, and I think that people just found that appealing. You know, it was something new, and it's Polish food, you know, perhaps not how they'd quite seen it before. And I think, you know, it just kind of ended up being, so from one trip really being sort of re-inspired by how things really are today in Poland. That's kind of what really influenced the book, as well as, you know, kind of honouring the sort of food of my childhood. So I feel it's got a good mix and a good balance in there of modern and traditional.
And I have to say, it does look fantastic.
Thank you.
I personally I love it, and I think, like, even myself not really knowing too much about it, you know, you can just see that there's, you know, light bites and soups and like all things that obviously we like, you already know what those things are, so it's really interesting that there's different takes on it. And I have to say, high tea, I'm a massive high tea, afternoon tea, cream teas, any way you want to give me tea and something sugary. So I have to say that is a bit that I really want to go and dive into.
I think that it's where do you begin and where do you end, but I think with the sweet treats and cakes, for me, I'd sort of, grown up and, I think Poles really enjoy a slice of cake and a nice cup of lemon tea, and or a slice of cheesecake or something like that, and they'll really treat themselves to it. There's a really beautiful sort of cafe culture in Poland, particularly in sort of Warsaw and Krakow, where people will go out and just have a nice slice of cake and a coffee or a tea. And so that's why I think that chapter was kind of, it wasn't just a dessert. It's really a celebration of, no, I quite fancy something sweet and I'm going to have it now in the middle of the day or in the middle of the afternoon. And so that's quite, I think, a unique concept that, that we have in Poland. It's kind of, something you feel like having something sweet. It's called something na słodko. So, I think there's so much to be explored, and, I wanted to bring out the freshness as well. So lots of the sweet recipes are made with fruit. So you'll have apple cakes and plum cakes and apple pancakes and, tray bakes filled with blueberries. And, it's that freshness that I just think people don't expect maybe from Polish cooking, that is just, it's always there.
Yeah, I love it. I don't know about anyone listening, but I'm starving now. It sounds absolutely incredible. And I wondered, is there a particular moment or a book, a movie, a person, something that's inspired you to get to where you are right now?
Yeah, so I think, well, funny enough, when I started off with just, food blogging, it's all that classic. I'd watch sort of Julia and Julia and, which was the story of the girl who blogged through Julia Child's recipes. And, and there's a one point where she says, well, I have thoughts, and I could share those thoughts. And I was very much in that space at home, so looking out the window, thinking, what can I do? What could I write about? And, that was the point which loads of my friends had said, you need a food blog, you need to start a food blog. It's just kind of that, where do you really begin? So I think the online course gave me that kind of little nudge and a bit more support. And I got a distinction with the diploma in journalism. So I felt that I'd had quite a good bit of training. It wasn't just launching into a blog. But as far as where it was heading, I didn't really have a plan. Lots of inspiration from food writers. So I've always kind of really loved anything that takes me outside of the UK, on a journey. So, I've always loved kind of Middle Eastern cookbooks, Far Eastern cookbooks. And I just really felt that there was a big gap, that we were lacking any sort of a voice in Polish food. It just wasn't really there. It wasn't really visible. And I think I then sort of came across Olia Hercules, who had written a beautiful book called Mamushka, which was all about the food of Ukraine. And that very much kind of opened the doors to people thinking, actually, maybe there is something interesting on that side of Europe. And then another friend of mine came out with a book at a similar sort of time, but a Polish book called Polska. And then mine came out. And then just recently, another beautiful book called Salt and Thyme has come out, which is all about kind of modern Russian Siberian recipes. So my shelves are now starting to reflect the sort of food that I really love, but it has taken quite a lot of time for those voices to come through. And I think it's something that should be celebrated because, there's a whole lot of stuff to explore. Not just sort of, I think Eastern Europe is very much an old terminology. I think it's really Central Europe and beyond, really, but there's still so much there to be explored. So there have been lots of influences and, people who have inspired me. And mainly people have said, do it, please do it, please write this book because we want to hear about your experiences of Polish food. And, people like me who maybe were born here, second generation, or have got Polish heritage, it's just something you can reconnect in a very straightforward and simple way. So I think it's that's been the best part of writing the book, I think.
And what do you feel are the biggest myths out there when it comes to Polish food?
So I think, the myths are that everybody sort of assumes that Eastern European food, if you want to call it that, can be a bit heavy, a bit stodgy. It's all very meaty, it's all very meat based. And I don't think that's true. I see a lot of sort of up and coming vegetarian and vegan restaurants now in Poland. They're really embracing, veganism over there in a big way. I mean, as we are in lots of places, but it certainly isn't all about kind of the meaty food. There's certainly a big sort of comfort element factor in there, and you'll see that through some of the recipes, like the sort of the kopytka, which is similar to gnocchi. There's lots of things that are made with flour, so the dumplings, the noodles, and potatoes. Food, what I would sort of say, food of the land. So anything that's sort of with wheat, with potatoes, obviously cabbage, fresh vegetables as well, sort of the beetroots, the kind of that sort of thing. But I think there's certainly a freshness there now. It's not all about the stodgy food, and certainly there's a lot in my book that I highlight quite a lot of the the sort of the side dishes, and I've got a flatbread with courgette and red cabbage and rocket, and forest mushrooms with sort of thyme cream on sourdough. So there is lots of interesting flavours going on in the Polish kitchen, which I think people would be surprised about.
Absolutely. And what are some of the most common fears that you see that people maybe fear something, or is it just the unknown that you would say? People aren't really sure what the cuisine is, so they're not really sure what to expect?
Yeah, there's certainly that element of people are just not sure, and probably even couldn't really even name a Polish dish. People sort of, what is Polish food? And you might mention things like pierogi, which are dumplings, and bigos, which is a kind of a hunter's stew that was traditionally kind of made in the forest with all the sort of the days. Hunts and gatherings would go in there and it'd boil away for days and days. So, there are sort of the main sort of national dishes that people often know about, but maybe not so many of the others. And also, I think people associate Polish cooking with it being very sort of time consuming and labour intensive, probably because they've seen their grandma in the kitchen for days, hand making all these dumplings, or their mama. And I think that for me, it was about finding ways of exploring those flavours without tying everybody to the kitchen. But I've had people making my honey and rye loaf, and they've never made bread before, but it's quite easy. And even people having a go at kind of flavouring their own vodkas, and with lovely seasonal fruits and things. Oh, wow. So there are certain things in there that I think anybody could have a go at and have great success with. And you certainly don't have to be Polish to have a go. It's just really another cuisine to explore.
I love that. Well, I know I certainly am. I'm definitely going to. It sounds fab. Can you share a lesson that you learned early on that still impacts how you do business or how you live today?
So the lesson is just, firstly, consistency, which, I think a lot of people sort of try, they might sort of start a food blog and then give up, or, sort of think they've got this really great idea for a book, but then not really ever do anything about it. I think the lesson is that you have to be quite self-driven. You have to have a really good idea of where you're heading, and you have to take steps every day to make those dreams happen, because I think too many people sort of sit back and expect this, big hand to point out of the sky and go, this will be you're going to get a book deal, or, you're going to have a successful blog. And actually, the people that I know who are incredibly successful are the ones that just work very, very hard day in, day out. And it is, an uphill struggle, and especially if you're kind of trying to promote a cuisine that's a bit unknown, or, has any sort of a kind of unknown connotation to it. So it's really just being very positive and picking out the best bits, and, keep on with that message, really, and keep trying to get people to listen to you. Be consistent and be persistent, really. I suppose there's a little snippet for you.
I love that. I think that's really, really key. And I think, consistency is just huge. I think you just nailed it there.
Don't give up, don't let anybody tell you that your ideas are rubbish, because the amount of people that said to me, my goodness, who would want a book on Polish food? And it's now sort of, it's got an American translation. So I've got a publisher in America and it's doing incredibly well over there. It's been very well received. You sort of sometimes have to look beyond the feedback that you might get to say, actually, I have got something to say here, and it is new and it is interesting, and people will enjoy reading about this, and they'll enjoy cooking and exploring this new sort of new idea. And I think as long as your ideas are, that's the trick, is to come up with an idea that's kind of new and interesting, but that it's not so niche that nobody would connect with it. And I think what I found with the Polish book is that people have connected with it in ways I could have never imagined. So it's having that kind of, holding on to that sense of having something to say and just finding a way of saying it.
And what's the easiest way for someone to start enjoying Polish food? What would be something that a complete beginner or someone that's new to it, is the easiest way for them to start?
But that's a great question. I think literally go and find a Polish shop and find a fresh Polish donut, because that is really mind blowing. We actually have a day which is just, we've gone past it, but it's called Fat Thursday, which is it's the same as, I suppose, our Shrove Tuesday, which marks the beginning of Lent. And on that day, you just kind of go mad and eat as much sweet stuff as you can find. So much so that it's kind of by some people been sort of renamed as Donut Day, because the queues in Poland for people trying to get their hands on their sort of last batch of fresh donuts is really quite remarkable. But I have to say, I had a party last weekend and I put 50 Polish donuts out and they were gone, literally gone within minutes. And I had people saying, gosh, these are so interesting. And I was saying, yeah, because, they're Polish and they're filled with rose petal jam. And, and it was just, they were quite, kind of, where can I get my next fix, literally. So, I would say the easiest and quickest way is to go and seek out a Polish donut.
Amazing. I love that Fat Thursday as well. That's brilliant.
Yeah, it's a shame that can't be every week. But
I know, every Thursday, that would be amazing. I think I have fat like Monday and Sundays.
Does anybody need an excuse really to eat a donut? I think just go for it. But otherwise, there's a growing sort of number of Polish restaurants about now. So certainly in London, there are a few restaurants that have been going on really since the end of the Second World War. Because the Polish government in exile actually used to have their meetings in certain places. So certainly in South Kensington, there are at least 2 Polish restaurants that are still going, still very relevant, and they serve the most amazing Polish food. So I would certainly seek out 1 or 2 of those.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, so pick up a donut.
And find a Polish restaurant, but a good one.
Yeah, I know. I'm definitely going to do that. Thank you. And is there anything else that you feel is important for people to know that we haven't covered today?
I think it's just really, how to, I suppose my last 7 years now have been, as well as writing the cookbook, as well as doing the blog, really, what I am, sort of my official title is a freelance food writer. So I create recipes for other people. I work with brands. I work with magazines. I do kind of pop-ups and supper clubs. I've started to kind of work with some interesting people now, different sort of chefs, and and collaborate with them. So, I think the writing is one thing, and the working in food is something else. And, I'm not really just going to go out and launch a restaurant or anything, but I do like to kind of work in food and around food as much as possible. So, it's just really about being quite self-driven, because anybody, anybody who freelances, it's quite an uncertainty. You don't know where your next commission is going to come from or who you're going to work with next. But on the other hand, it keeps things very interesting and, never a dull moment. And, so far, 8 years in or 7 years in, I've managed to sort of have this career and work from home and still be, do things quite flexibly. So it's definitely been a really great experience for me to work as a freelancer and just to grow my business and to sort of get my name out there. And to let people know what I do. And I think that's, people sort of think, oh, what does a cookery book writer do? And I think that, a modern cookery book writer these days will actually wear many hats, as it were. But I think the ultimate goal is that, it's all about sharing a love of food and finding people that you connect with, and making things happen.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this. I know just from a personal point of view, I've found it fascinating. So I'm sure listeners have as well. And thank you, just for being here today.
Thank you so much for the interview, Kerry.
And how can someone that wants to find out more about Ren Behan and the book, and how you can help them, where would someone go to find out more?
Yeah, so my website, that's kind of the original one that I've always had going, is renbehan.com, and everything's on there. All of my social media links. I'm kind of on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. You can find me anywhere, really. Drop me an email, and if you need any advice on kind of the world of food blogging, cookbook writing, always happy to help.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ren, and thank you everyone for listening. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.